Ugh, okay, where am I now?
This is hell.
No, I mean, what's it called?
Okay, I'll just cut to the point. You haven't done an OC video in...
And then can I leave?
Fine, but stop ruining my fun while you're here.
I promise nothing. Weird framing devices, am I right? Anywho, greetings, fillies and gentlecolts. So, judging by the views these videos pull in, I'm to understand character study is fairly popular with you people. I know I've not made one of these or really anything in a while, so to make up for it, I have a slight change of pace today. Instead of 1 OC, I will be featuring 7. Come on, admit it, you know this was worth the wait. This is also reflective of a slight change I'm making that for once isn't going to destroy the series. Groups of OCs can now be submitted as one entity. The same rule still applies as it would for a single character, plus one other modification I'll be getting into later. There aren't currently any limits on how many OCs can be in a group right now, but I still reserve the right to turn down any submissions for any reason. Now with all that intro stuff out of the way, allow me to introduce you to the following: Reaping, Bale, Garuda, Deus Ex Machina, Jack of all trades, and Carney. You likely know the formula to this show by now, and if not, well, there are the old episodes. With that said, we have a lot to get through, so let's get this sideshow on the road. Okay, so I normally don't like to spoil the stories which submitted OCs are involved in, but here I kinda have to for anything to make sense. One small asterisk though, the creator has decided to write their story around their pony Sona as well, so for the sake of anonymity, I'm going to be referring to said character as protagonist. Speaking of whomst, our story begins simply with a rivalry between protagonist and Reaping, the latter of whom serves a similar role to the devil on your shoulder, goading protagonist into error and ill-doing. Unsurprisingly, this leads to bad blood between the two, which eventually culminates in an epic final battle of good versus evil, and we've seen this all before. So, thanks to... Wait, protagonist dies? Well, that's a slight change of pace, but not a very permanent one though, as it is revealed protagonist will be able to resurrect, if he can manage to improve himself by doing battle with Reaping and his menagerie of wackos, and until such point will remain in a comatose state. Enraged by this and fearing his own defeat, Reaping creates Bale, Garuda, and Corzin, the former an ice dragon who steals from folks and waits for them to come and fail horribly in battle with him for his own amusement, squandering his intelligence on short-sighted entertainment and doing things the laziest way possible. The latter a changeling who spends her time similarly to how I'd imagine Chrysalis doing so, seducing others and feeding off the love to create a hive of drones. It's not really well explained though, so I'm just gonna move on. And last, Garuda, the Griffin mercenary who carries delusions of grandeur and believes himself a gift to the world. He is good at his job though, and likes to send off his victims with a cocky remark, not unlike a certain other merc I know. No word on his fourth wall abilities though. As expected, protagonist soon does battle with these four one by one, this time emerging victorious and returning to our land of the living. Before doing so though, he has a brief conversation with Reaping however, attempting to convince him to change. Since Reaping has himself gotten him to lie though, it falls on deaf ears. Our story's not over yet though. As our protagonist returns to his ordinary life, things once again go awry as a fool by the name of Jack of all trades appears on his doorstep, apparently struck with amnesia. A blank flank despite his many talents, Jack has a tendency to shirk responsibility or personal growth as a coping mechanism for his anxiety. He also sees both protagonist and Reaping as guidance figures similar to older siblings, the former of which unsurprisingly takes him in. Not all is well, however, as unlike most villains, Reaping is riddled with rage and regret after his defeat. Eventually, the culmination of his feelings and a healthy diet of others' egos manifests itself into a persona known as Deus Ex Machina, a temperamental old owl who bears powers over time and serves only Reaping. Meanwhile, Jack is somehow also able to manifest his own persona, Corzin. Again, she also happens to be Jack's mother somehow and tries to guide him to the dark side, using him as a tool to feed off protagonist and presumably make her own hive, which I think makes protagonist the father, but I'm not too sure how that works. Oh, and if you're confused by all this persona madness, that's because they aren't from MLP, but the video game series of the same name. To quote the wiki directly, a persona is a manifestation of a persona user's personality in the Persona series, referred to as a mask for an individual to use to face hardship. But here's the thing, I wouldn't have known that if it it were not for making this video. You see, these are crossover OCs, and I had a very difficult time with their backstory until I did some digging. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I'm not a big fan of crossover OCs. They tend to be very confusing if you don't know 2 or more source materials, and often don't make sense in either universe they draw from as a result of their mixed origin. For this reason, I'm barring crossover OCs from the series after this video, just to keep things simple. Fall to Equestria, of course, notwithstanding. Either way, all 4 are dealt with, and now, with Reaping and his entire entourage defeated once and for all, it is time for the final epic battle between protagonist and some random crocodile. This is Carne, the Capactly, a jovial creature who doesn't even bear ill will towards protagonist. He simply wishes to feed on him and the weird creatures in his head and move on to bigger and better things. As the fight continues, protagonist finds himself progressively weaker as time goes on, as he is absorbed into the reptile, but against all odds, he still manages to come out on top. And at long last, with protagonist finally free of his personal gaggle of freak shows, I can finally say, the end. This is another reason why I try to avoid spoiling the OC's backstories. It takes forever. Of course, since there's 7 characters, I have a lot to talk about. Starting with Reaping, while some may call it a simplistic idea, I would respond that sometimes a simple idea is the best. Take Jyc, for example. After the reasonable motivations and careful tactics of Chrysalis, the hypnotic manipulation of the Sirens, and the attempt at a cunning spider-like predator who relies on traps and Sombra, the simplicity Jyc offered in being a big red monster who's wrecking things just because was seen as a breath of fresh air. And with every villain OC and their pet goldfishes trying to go for the tragic backstory, the simplicity offered in someone like Reaping is refreshing just the same. Bear in mind there is a significant difference between a simple design and a simple-minded design. Garuda, well, I'll admittedly have more to say for the next segment, but as for here, Griffin OCs aren't something you see very often. In fact, that's something I quite enjoy, is that these aren't just simple pony characters. The creators thought to reach quite far outside that box, while also, for the most part, staying within reasonable bounds for the show. The same point is exemplified even more in Carne, who, as a Capactly, is quite a bit outside the expected realm of OCs, but still fits as something that'd be expected from the show being part of Aztec mythology. Deus Ex, while admittedly flawed, and I'll get into that, is quite a fun idea. I mean, it's kinda hard to beat a 4th dimensional robot owl, though I think that works against it too. Jack of all trades, however, requires some explaining. See, in case you didn't pick up on it, the characters are explicitly supposed to be representations of the 7 deadly sins. According to the creator, these correlate to the characters as follows: Pride for Reaping, Deus Ex's Wrath, Garuda Envy, Bale Greed, Carne Gluttony, Corzin Lust, and Jack of course is Sloth or Avarice. While some of the characters like Corzin, for instance, are pretty simple in how they embody their vices, Jack on the other hand is, in my unprofessional opinion, a very clever take on Sloth. It would be incredibly easy to have him embody his vice by simply being lazy, but that'd also be boring and not very satisfying since the character doesn't really do anything. Instead, however, he intentionally holds himself back out of an anxiety of the future and of responsibility, something which I think most people will have a far easier time relating to, and something that's more accurate to reality as far as I'm concerned. Take it from me, laziness gets really boring. This is why Sudbury schools are able to get kids to learn without forcing them. They allow them to bore themselves on doing nothing to the point that they actively seek stimulation on their own, which of course leads to self-directed discovery. Corzin is just a really fun design. The Swiss cheese holes in her are all shaped like hearts, and she carries a secondary color scheme of pink instead of blue like most unreformed changelings, which I always find fun. This is the embodiment of lust, and you can tell just from looking at her. Heck, even her name, Corzin, is actually Spanish for heart, or sweetheart if you use it in that context. It even sounds like the English courtesan if you say it in the right accent, or at least it does in Google Translate.
Corazón.
And lastly, there's Bale. He's competent enough. If anything, what bothers me about him is I can't think of much to say. He's just kind of middling as far as OCs go, unexceptional in just about every way, but points for being a dragon, I suppose. So as I stated, these characters are supposed to embody the 7 sins, though I feel there's been a slight error in assignment. Reaping is currently set to embody Pride and Garuda Envy. Even if you take nothing else from this video, consider the following. These two should really be swapped. Allow me to explain. See, Garuda prides himself on being the best mercenary there is, and refuses to play second banana to anyone. He goes out of his way to leave his victims with tailored remarks, and believes himself a gift to the world. Personally, I would call that pride. Meanwhile, Reaping does behave much like a perfectionist and, on his own, seems to embody pride, but there's also the fact that there's not much of a reason he fights protagonist other than that he's the assigned bad guy. And yes, I did just praise the simplicity of Reaping's design, but modifying him to better represent Envy wouldn't necessarily require complicating him either. To come back to the example of Triarii, he destroys Equestria out of rage and perhaps despite his brother Scorpion. He's still a simple villain, he just has a simple motivation to complement that. Reaping could just as easily be fighting protagonist because he envies him for whatever reason, or perhaps the good things he has in life, and so he goes about trying to lure protagonist into the vices he and his entourage represent in order to take those things away from him. This doesn't complicate or change the character on any significant level, only adds an explanation for his character. The bells and whistles that come with Triarii wouldn't even be necessary here because unlike Triarii, Reaping does not have to fit into a previously established story. At the very least, it works better than whatever motivation could be derived from he has ego issues. And whilst I'm on a topic involving Garuda, I feel the Deadpool influence could stand to be toned down a bit. Not that Deadpool isn't awesome, I just find it a bit uncreative. The creator detailed his tendencies to try leaving his victim with a cold and likely degrading remark as he fulfills his contracts, and his egotistical and overconfident nature. He's even specifically described as a merc with a mouth. Need I say more? Oh, and quick side note, I don't think they have guns in the world of MLP, or is that from Persona 2? Moving on to Deus Ex, I find his ability to control time doesn't mesh very well with the story. It's not utilized much so far as I can figure, and even if it was, time travel is such a chaotic plot element that would likely ruin the story which these characters occupy. He also seems just a bit overpowered by comparison to the others. I mean, he's literally named Deus Ex Machina. Perhaps he could instead have powers attached to his rage, or win seeing as he's an owl, or why not both? Perhaps he could grow stronger with his rage like a Saiyan, commanding great dust storms or tornadoes, but also lose control and think irrationally as he does so, his wind becoming more erratic and self-destructive, integrating why wrath is a bad thing into the story and the character. As for Jack, I think a bit more focus should be put into his resolution. Perhaps I might have missed it, but as it stands, he receives no real special attention or conclusion for his arc. Considering the thought that went into his motivation and how he embodies his vice, it's clearly a missed opportunity. But what conclusion to give him? That is the question. Well, while the creator can do whatever they please, this is what I would do. Since he sees protagonist as a guide figure, I think it stands to reason that he should serve as an inspiration to him. In doing so, he learns to overcome his anxiety and simultaneously breaks free from Corzin. In the process, he earns his cutie mark, whatever that may be, and goes on to take life head on, becoming a friend and ally to protagonist for the remainder of the story as well. Thankfully in Corzin's case, and unfortunately in Bale's case, I don't actually have much more to say about either of them, but I do have something to say about Carne. As a character, I think he's fine, but I believe his timing in the story just doesn't work. Right now, he doesn't come in until after the final battle with Reaping, and for the most part the closure of the character arcs. Technically, protagonist is dragged out here, but it's effectively over otherwise. Now, I think y'all can see the problems with this already, but just in case, this is a problem because Carne himself feels like an epilogue to the story rather than a part of it, and he drags our protagonist's character arc to boot. I would instead have him show up with either Bale, Corzin, and Garuda, or with Jack, Deus Ex, and Corzin's return. Hey, while I'm here, can someone explain to me the appeal of crossover OCs? I mean, putting two worlds together is begging for trouble on top of the OC itself. If you put effort into it, like making the crossover work. But that bit more than name me one OC. Overall, it's obvious these OCs had a lot of creative ideas put into them, but make no mistake, they are rough around the edges. Jack, for instance, was a brilliant idea for a character, but his conclusion remains in desperate need of development, which I think makes a pretty good microcosm for my thoughts as a whole, actually. There's a lot of good here, but it needs a bit more focus. That said, there are parts like Garuda that are simply lacking and could deal to be retooled. As such, I give this group of 7 OCs a convoluted score of 6.457 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. This is Onyx the Dragon, signing out. Hey, can I go now?
Sure, whatever. Not like I enjoy having you around or anything.
Okay, cool. See ya.
Wait! So much for taking tea with someone agreeable.